Marissa Daniels was the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. At 42, she had spent the better part of 2 decades building a career in
After
financial
careful review
consulting,
of the evidence
traveling
presented,
coast to
this
coast to
court
help struggling
finds in
companies
favor of
find
the
their footing.
plaintiff.
Her suits were tailored, her emails efficient, and her life ran on a calendar booked down to the hour. But none of her professional achievements mattered more than her most recent and most sacred role being a mother. Isaiah, her bright-eyed 8-month-old son, was her world. He had a smile that could melt anyone's defenses, a curious spirit, and a surprising amount of personality for someone who had only recently figured out how to sit up on his own. That day, Marissa had meticulously prepared for their flight from Atlanta to New Orleans. The trip was shortless than 2 hours, but flying with an infant was never simple. She'd chosen a mid-morning flight to give Isaiah time to nap beforehand and packed his diaper bag with military precision: 3 bottles, 4 diapers, a change of clothes, his favorite giraffe toy, a clean blanket, and a backup pacifier clipped securely to his overalls. She'd even made sure to bring a fresh snack for herself in case she didn't have time to eat once they arrived. Experience had taught her that everything, absolutely everything, needed to be accounted for when traveling with a baby. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was alive with its usual rhythm. The rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, and distant rumble of jet engines had become familiar sounds to Marissa. They were in a strange way comforting. This was her element. She'd maneuvered through security while balancing Isaiah on her hip, smiled politely at the TSA agent who barely looked at her ID, and made it to her gate right on time. A few passengers smiled at her along the way, offering that universal look of sympathy reserved for traveling parents. One woman even chuckled when Isaiah let out a squeal of joy at the moving walkway. As she boarded the plane, Marissa took a deep breath. So far, so good. She made her way to her seat near the rear of the aircraft, a window seat, just as she'd requested. Isaiah was calm in her arms, his big brown eyes scanning the interior of the plane with fascination. The flight attendant near the entrance offered a generic welcome aboard without looking up, and Marissa nodded back politely. She didn't need fanfare. She just needed this flight to be smooth. After settling into her seat, Marissa buckled herself in and adjusted Isaiah comfortably on her lap. She pulled out a small cloth to wipe away a bit of drool from his chin. He giggled, which made her smile. Outside the window, ground crew bustled around the tarmac, loading luggage and checking tires. The sight usually gave Marissa a sense of control. Not today. Today she was nervous, not because of flying, but because of the unpredictability of traveling with a baby. That's when she first noticed the flight attendant, with the blonde hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun. The woman moved briskly through the aisle with an air of rigid formality, as though her job were a burden rather than a calling. Her name tag read, Karen. Her face was set in a permanent scowl, her lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. When Karen's eyes landed briefly on Marissa and Isaiah, there was no warmth, no smile, just a flicker of something cold and dismissive. It was subtle, but Marissa felt it. That uncomfortable prickle of being watched, judged, dismissed before a word had even been exchanged. Still, she told herself not to overthink it. Maybe Karen had a rough morning. Maybe she'd dealt with difficult passengers earlier. Maybe it was nothing. Marissa had spent her entire adult life knowing when and when not to read into people's body language. But now, with her child in her arms, the stakes felt higher. Every sideways glance carried more weight. Every ignored smile registered a little deeper. As the plane taxied onto the runway, the engine noise swelled and Isaiah's demeanor began to change. The roar, the pressure, the sudden sensation of movement. His tiny frame stiffened. His lips quivered. And then the inevitable happened. He began to cry, loudly. Marissa immediately switched into full soothe mode. She rocked him, gently whispered reassuring words, offered him the pacifier, everything she could think of. Isaiah was not a naturally fussy baby, but the unfamiliar sensation of takeoff was overwhelming for him. And for Marissa, each second of his crying felt like a spotlight burning down on her. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere around her, the quiet sighs, the shuffle of annoyed passengers turning slightly in their seats. She was doing everything right, everything she could, but she knew how quickly things could turn. A crying baby on a plane wasn't just a baby, it became a symbol, a scapegoat, a litmus test for other people's patience and prejudice. Marissa tried to remind herself that this was temporary, that babies cry, and most people understand that. That no matter how others reacted, she knew she was a good mother. But all those inner reassurances began to unravel the moment Karen returned to her aisle with that same disapproving glare and the sharp edge of judgment flashing in her eyes. At this moment, the story that would later capture national attention hadn't yet begun. There were no headlines, no hashtags, no viral videos, just a mother, a child, and a moment of rising tension at 30,000 feet. A moment that would set off a chain of events Marissa could never have imagined. But for now, it was just about surviving the flight, comforting her child, and bracing herself for what she feared would come next. The plane surged forward, wheels thundering down the runway. As it lifted into the sky, Isaiah's soft cries turned into full-blown wails. The shift in cabin pressure startled him, and his little ears couldn't adjust fast enough. He squirmed and flailed in Marissa's arms, red-faced and inconsolable. She did everything a loving mother would. She rocked him gently, whispered reassurances, rubbed his back in slow circles, and offered his pacifier over and over. But Isaiah's sobs only grew louder, drowned out only by the roar of the engines. Marissa could feel the tension rising around her like invisible smoke. She could sense other passengers shifting in their seats, plugging in earbuds, casting furtive glances her way. A few faces, especially those of older women nearby, showed compassion. But others, men in business suits, one young woman in athleisure scrolling her phone, wore thin masks of irritation. And then she heard it, the click of those polished heels. Karen Miller was marching down the aisle with all the authority of someone ready to enforce her personal idea of order. Her posture was stiff, her arms tucked tightly at her sides, her expression severe. When she reached Marissa's row, she didn't bother lowering her voice. "Mom," she said sharply, "you need to quiet your child. Has disturbing other passengers." Marissa blinked, startled by the tone more than the words. "I'm trying," she said calmly, holding Isaiah close. "Has a baby." The engine noise frightened him. Karen folded her arms. "Everyone is scared of something, but we don't all scream about it, do we?" The sarcasm stung. Marissa opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. Her heart pounded with a mix of humiliation and growing anger. She wasn't some negligent parent scrolling Instagram while her child howled. She was doing everything humanly possible to soothe him. And now, instead of compassion, she was being reprimanded like a disruptive teenager. "I'm doing the best I can," she said this time with more edge in her voice. "Hell, calm down once we level out." Karen looked around as if to demonstrate how many eyes were on them, then leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped into a tone of performative concern. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before flying today." Marissa's jaw clenched. Isaiah let out another sharp cry, his body arching with frustration. She gently bounced him in her arms, trying to keep her own composure. From across the aisle, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes spoke up. "Hess just a baby," she said softly. "They all cry during takeoff. It's normal." Karen turned her head sharply toward the woman and offered a withering glare. "Thank you for your input, Mom, but I'll handle this." There it was. Not just irritation, but disdain. The kind that didn't come from a long shift or a crying baby. The kind that was personal. Karen turned back to Marissa, her face icy. "If you can't keep your child under control, I may have to escalate this. We can't have this level of disturbance for the entire flight." Marissa's hands were trembling, not from fear but fury. "Escalate?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. "Has a baby. Has crying because his ears hurt. That's not a disturbance. That's biology." Karen leaned in slightly again, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "Either get him quiet or I will." The threat was unmistakable. For the remainder of takeoff, Marissa said nothing. She just held Isaiah tighter, her mind racing. The noise began to subside as the plane reached cruising altitude. Isaiah's cries slowly faded into hiccuping whimpers. Eventually, with exhaustion overtaking his distress, he fell asleep against her chest. Marissa exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But peace was short-lived. When the seatbelt sign dinged off and the in-flight beverage service began, Karen resumed her rounds. But every time she passed Marissa's row, her cold eyes lingered, just a beat too long. It was no longer about a crying child. It was personal now, targeted. Isaiah stirred after a while, rubbing his eyes and fussing softly. Marissa reached into the diaper bag for a bottle but froze. The pouch meant to keep it warm wasn't there. She'd left it behind at security in her rush to get through the line. Her stomach sank. Isaiah wouldn't drink cold milk. He never had. She knew this. She'd learned it the hard way weeks ago on another trip. He would push the bottle away, cry harder, and exhaust himself until Marissa figured it out. She flagged down another flight attendant. A younger woman with gentle features and a kind smile approached. "Hi," Marissa said, her voice strained but polite. "Is there any chance you could help me warm this bottle a little? I left my insulated pouch at TSA." "Of course," the woman said warmly. "We can use some warm water from the galley. I'll be right back." But as the younger flight attendant made her way forward, Karen intercepted her. Marissa watched as the two women exchanged tense whispers. The kind attendant gestured toward the bottle in her hand, but Karen's response was curt, her eyes flicking back toward Marissa. Moments later, Karen returned alone. She handed the bottle back, still cold. "We are not a restaurant," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We don't warm bottles. It's against company policy." Marissa stared at her, but the other attendant said she could. She was mistaken, Karen snapped. "There are health code concerns. We're not authorized to heat food or liquids for passengers." It was a lie. Marissa had flown with Isaiah 5 times before. Every time some compassionate crew member had helped warm his bottle without a second thought. This wasn't about policy. It was about Karen. "Please," Marissa said softly, trying one last time. "He won't drink it cold. I just need some warm water. I've already told you," Karen cut in. "Now either handle it or I will." She turned and walked away, leaving Marissa stunned, holding a cold bottle and a baby beginning to cry again. This time there were no sympathetic glances from passengers, only discomfort. People looked away. The atmosphere had shifted. Marissa was no longer just the mother of a fussy baby. Thanks to Karen's loud warnings and accusatory tone, she had been framed as a disruptive presence. And now she was alone, isolated at 30,000 feet. But deep inside, something was beginning to build in her, a quiet rage, a righteous fury. Because this wasn't just about a crying child anymore. This was about something deeper, something colder, and Marissa Daniels had no intention of letting it go. As Isaiah cried against her chest, clutching her blouse with tiny fists, Marissa sat frozen, her mind spinning in circles, her arms locked around her child. The bottle of cold milk trembled in her hand. She didn't know if it was from the airplane's light turbulence or the emotion rising in her chest, like a tide she could no longer hold back. It wasn't just exhaustion. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was anger, the slow-burning kind that starts deep in your bones and climbs inch by inch until it reaches your throat. Something about the way Karen had spoken to her didn't feel like standard airline protocol. It wasn't just unkind. It wasn't just unprofessional. It felt targeted, personal. And as Marissa looked down at her own handskin, the color of dark oak, and then to Isaiah's soft caramel-toned face, a sickening thought rooted itself in her mind. Would she have been treated this way if she were white? She didn't want to think that. She didn't want to believe that her baby's cries, so common on any flight, had become intolerable solely because of the melanin in his skin. But she'd seen the look in Karen's eyes, that cold, dismissive flicker, that sharp, judging tone reserved only for her and no one else. The other passengers weren't being berated for minor things. She hadn't seen Karen raise her voice at the couple across the aisle who refused to stow their laptop bag, or at the man near the emergency exit who took his mask off for half the flight. No, they got courtesy, patience. Marissa got contempt. Her mind began to replay the earlier moments, trying to make sense of the pattern that now felt unavoidable. The way Karen had looked at her, boarding the plane like she was a nuisance before she even sat down. The refusal to allow the bottle to be warmed even after another flight attendant had already agreed. The words, "We're not a restaurant." The tone-biting, loud public. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad day. This was something else. Something rooted in a long, painful history she knew all too well. She had grown up with stories like this. Her grandmother used to talk about being asked to sit at the back of buses, being followed in stores, being spoken to in clipped, condescending tones by women who thought they were better simply because of their skin color. Marissa had believed, or at least hoped, that the world her son was born into would be better. But here she was, educated, successful, composed, and still being treated like she didn't belong. Because to Karen, it seemed she didn't. Marissa glanced around the cabin again. People avoided her eyes now. No one offered a smile this time. Her seat felt smaller, the air around her heavier. Isaiah let out a sleepy whimper. Marissa gently rubbed his back, whispering softly, "Shh, I've got you, baby. Mommy's here." She didn't know if she was comforting him or herself. At that moment, the young flight attendant, the same one who had tried to warm the bottle earlier, walked by again. She cast Marissa a quick glance. There was something apologetic in her eyes, a flash of sympathy, perhaps even guilt, but she said nothing, just moved on. Marissa wanted to cry, not from helplessness, but from that quiet, soul-deep exhaustion that only comes when you're fighting a battle you didn't choose. The battle of being judged, not for what you did, but for who you are. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking for the same courtesy, the same understanding that would have been freely given to a white mother in her shoes. And she knew it. Every bone in her body told her the same truth. This wouldn't have happened if I looked different. She didn't need a courtroom to prove it. She felt it in her gut. The plane hummed steadily in the background as the flight continued. Isaiah had finally dozed off, his breathing slow and even. Marissa rested her head against the window, staring blankly at the cottony clouds outside. But her mind remained alert, collecting every detail like pieces of evidence. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to be another story that got buried. She wouldn't be silent. Not this time. When the captain made the announcement that they'd be starting their descent into New Orleans, Marissa felt both relief and dread. She wanted off that plane, but she also feared what might come next. Would Karen try to file a report against her? Would there be some accusation waiting? Would someone twist the story before she had a chance to tell it? As the wheels touched down with a soft thud, Marissa tightened her grip on Isaiah and stared straight ahead. She didn't look at Karen when she passed by to check the rows. She didn't return the forced performative smile she finally offered, as if the whole incident could be smoothed over with a last-minute act of courtesy. No, it was too late for that. When the plane reached the gate and the fastened seatbelt sign turned off, Marissa didn't linger. She stood, gathered her things, and carried Isaiah, still asleep, down the aisle without so much as a word. Karen stood near the cockpit door, arms folded, her expression unreadable. As Marissa passed her, she felt the heat of the stairs from behind and the weight of everything that had happened pressing against her shoulders. And then, on the other side of the gate, there was her brother. David Daniels, tall, composed, dressed in a crisp navy suit and open-collar shirt, stood waiting with a look of concern that quickly turned to alarm when he saw her face. "Marissa," he asked softly, stepping forward. "What happened?" The dam broke. She told him everything, her voice low and trembling, Isaiah still asleep in her arms. She spoke of the crying, the refusal to help, the public humiliation, and the growing suspicion that it wasn't about a bottle or noise, or even policy. It was about them, about being black, about being unwelcome. David's jaw tightened with each sentence. "That's not just bad service," he said, his voice controlled, "but burning. That's targeted harassment. And you know what else it is?" Marissa didn't need him to say the word. She already knew it. David Daniels had always been the calm one, the one who weighed every word before speaking, who settled conflicts with facts instead of fury. But as he listened to his younger sister's voice tremble with exhaustion and quiet rage, he felt something shift inside him. Marissa wasn't the type to exaggerate. She didn't cry easily. And when she told him about the way Karen had treated her, about the threat, the refusal to help, the humiliation in front of an entire plane of strangers, he felt something cold and electric spread through his chest. "That's not just bad customer service," he said, stepping aside as Marissa adjusted Isaiah on her shoulder. "That's harassment. And yes, it's racial." She didn't disagree. Not anymore. They walked through the New Orleans terminal without saying much else. Marissa's steps were slower than usual. She looked like she was trying to hold herself together with threadbare dignity. Isaiah was still asleep, his soft breaths against her neck, the only thing keeping her from falling apart. When they reached the parking garage, David carefully took the diaper bag from her and opened the car door. As he buckled Isaiah into the rear-facing car seat, Marissa climbed into the front seat and just stared straight ahead. Her hands were in her lap, fingers twitching. The silence was thick. David got behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. "We need to do something," he said. Marissa turned her head slowly. "Like what?" Her voice was flat. "Tired." "Tell the truth," he replied. "Start with that." That night, after a quiet dinner with their parents and a handful of stunned family members who had come into town for the reunion, Marissa sat at the kitchen table laptop, open Isaiah, finally asleep in the guest room crib. David stood behind her, arms crossed, scanning her screen over her shoulder. She was staring at the complaint form on the airline's website. A blank box waited for her typed account of what happened, but suddenly it felt inadequate, clinical, cold. "I don't want to just file a complaint," she said. "I want people to know what she did." David nodded. "Then don't write it like a report. Write it like a story." "So she did." Marissa began typing. Her fingers hesitated at first, then flew across the keyboard with a quiet fury. She wrote about how she prepared for the flight, how she tried to comfort Isaiah, how she'd flown dozens of times without incident, how the other flight attendant had offered to help, and how Karen had shut it all down. She described the tone, the threats, the lie about policy. But she didn't rant. She didn't name-call. She let the facts speak for themselves. She ended the post with one question: is this the kind of treatment Black mothers should expect in 2025? Before hitting publish, she paused. David, standing behind her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not overreacting," he said gently. "Don't second-guess yourself." "You know what happened." "I know," she whispered. What if they turn it around? What if they say, I'm just playing the race card?" "They'll try," he said. "But the truth is, you're armor, and you're not alone." She clicked post. The story went live on Facebook just after 11:00 p.m. Marissa shared it publicly, tagged the airline's official page, and included the flight number. David followed with a Twitter thread summarizing the events, linking back to her post. Then they waited. They didn't have to wait long. By morning, the post had been shared over 10,000 times. Dozens of strangers commented, some offering support, others sharing their own travel horror stories. A few trolls slipped in with accusations of exaggeration or reverse racism, but they were drowned out by a wave of empathy and outrage. Then something unexpected happened. One comment stood out from a user named Claire Jenkins. "I was on that flight. I saw everything. She's telling the truth." Marissa's heart skipped. She clicked on Claire's profile and immediately recognized her, an older white woman who had sat across the aisle and spoken up to defend her during the flight. Marissa messaged her privately, thanking her for the comment and asking if she'd be willing to talk more. Within the hour, Claire replied with more than just words. She had taken a short video during the confrontation. Not the whole thing, but enough. Enough to show Karen's tone. Enough to hear Marissa's calm, respectful response. Enough to catch the part where the younger flight attendant tried to help and was waved off by Karen. The video was shaky and recorded from behind a seat back, but it was clear and powerful. Marissa felt tears spring to her eyes. "This is it," she whispered. "This proves it." David leaned over her shoulder. "This changes everything." With Claire's permission, they added the video to the post. Views surged. Local news outlets picked up the story by midday. By the next morning, national media was calling. Marissa's inbox was flooded with requests, interviews, statements, follow-ups. Her name was trending. So was Isaiah's. And then came the airline's response. A formal apology, a promise to investigate, the announcement that the flight attendant in question had been placed on administrative leave. But the real victory, at least in that moment, was seeing people believe her. Finally, people weren't dismissing her pain or gaslighting her into silence. They were listening. Still, David wasn't satisfied. "This isn't over," he said, scrolling through news coverage. "You've told your story. Now it's time to hold them accountable." Marissa nodded. She didn't want revenge. She wanted change. By the third day, the story had left Marissa's small New Orleans kitchen and exploded across the national landscape. What began as a late-night Facebook post by a tired mother had become a cultural lightning rod. Local news stations aired the video Claire Jenkins had recorded. Morning talk shows debated whether this was another example of systemic bias or just a one-off case of poor customer service. But to the thousands of viewers watching Marissa speak with calm clarity and visible pain, The truth was already self-evident. The video made it hard to deny. It showed Marissa sitting calmly, her voice soft but firm, asking for help. Karen's voice, in contrast, was clipped and dismissive. The moment where she snapped, "We are not a restaurant," echoed through living rooms, hospital waiting rooms, barber shops, and senior centers across America. And when Claire's voice off camera gently reminded Karen that Hess just a baby, only to be met with a glare, it solidified what many had long suspected this wasn't about noise. It was about power and prejudice. National media outlets picked up the story like a relay baton, racing with it from CNN to NBC, even landing a segment on Good Morning America. Marissa received more interview requests than she could answer. She turned most of them down, choosing only to speak with outlets that agreed not to exploit Isaiah's image. She wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. She just wanted the truth heard. But the story didn't stop with newsrooms. It caught fire online. On TikTok, young activists reenacted the scene with captions like, "This is what Black mothers face every day." On Twitter, hashtags like "Dar Fly with Dignity," "Nosh Isaiah's Flight," and "Sky West Silence" began trending. On Facebook, mothers of all backgrounds flooded Marissa's inbox with their own stories of being judged, ignored, shamed, or mistreated while flying with children. Even celebrities joined in. Viola Davis tweeted a message of support. So did Gabrielle Union. And then came Michelle Obama. "Being a mother is hard enough," the former First Lady wrote. "No one should face humiliation for doing their best, especially in public spaces." I stand with Marissa Daniels. It was a moment Marissa would never forget. But with national attention came scrutiny and backlash. A few right-wing blogs accused Marissa of playing the race card. They wrote articles claiming she was an opportunist, that she was leveraging outrage for attention. One particularly aggressive commentator on a cable news network, known for his inflammatory monologues, ran a segment titled "The Real Story Behind Flight 7269. He claimed to have an eyewitness who described Marissa as loud, rude, and uncooperative. The supposed witness, a man with a vaguely familiar voice and shadowed face, spoke in generalities. He said he had seen Marissa yell at the crew, that she refused to calm her baby, that the flight attendant was merely enforcing airline policy. David was watching from the living room couch, his face hardening with every sentence. "That's not a witness," he muttered. "That's an actor." And he wasn't wrong. Within hours, internet sleuths traced the man back to an amateur actor named Kevin Parks, who had appeared in several regional commercials and corporate safety training videos. More damning, a photo surfaced from 5 years earlier, showing him on stage during a community theater performance, standing right next to a familiar face, Karen Miller. The connection was undeniable. David and Marissa's legal team moved quickly. They issued a public statement denying the accusations and hinted at legal action. But Marissa remained composed. "They're afraid," she told her brother. "They know the truth is on our side. That's why they're trying so hard to rewrite it." Meanwhile, the airline was floundering. At first, SkyWest Airlines issued vague PR statements. "We are investigating. We take complaints seriously. We stand behind our employees." But it wasn't enough. Social media users flooded their posts with angry comments. Former employees came forward with stories about Karen's history of disciplinary issues and complaints from other passengers, mostly people of color. Then someone leaked the internal memos. Emails between Karen and supervisors showed a pattern of behavior: repeated passenger complaints, most involving women of color, mothers traveling alone, or passengers with disabilities. One email from a manager read, "Karen is difficult, but the union has protected her. Well, monitor." That was the final straw for many. Under mounting pressure, SkyWest issued a second statement. This time, they publicly apologized to Marissa and announced that Karen Miller had been placed on permanent administrative leave pending further disciplinary review. Still, David wasn't satisfied. "She's not just rude," he said one evening over tea. "She weaponized her position to humiliate a paying customer. She made up rules. She lied. And now she's using a propaganda machine to cover it up." Marissa nodded, her eyes dark with resolve. It's not just about her anymore. It's about the system that let her stay in that job. So they filed a defamation lawsuit against Karen, against the cable network, against the actor posing as a witness, and against the host who aired the segment with false claims. The public reaction was swift. While the media buzzed with talk of legal precedent and freedom of speech, ordinary people rallied behind Marissa. Fundraisers for her legal fees hit their goals within days, even though Marissa chose not to use them. "We're okay," she said in a video message. "Donate that money to single mothers who can't fight back." And so people did. Across the country, airports began training reviews. Airline unions quietly released internal memos encouraging more cultural sensitivity. A handful of other flight attendants anonymously at first came forward to say they'd seen Karen mistreat other Black passengers. Some even admitted they were afraid to speak out sooner. Marissa hadn't asked to be a symbol, but she had become one. Not because she shouted, not because she rioted, but because she told the truth, stood her ground, and refused to be silenced. And now the world was listening. What started as an act of public support quickly turned into a coordinated counterattack. Marissa Daniels' story had pierced through the nation's consciousness, sparking outrage, solidarity, and calls for reform. But in a country where narratives can be weaponized as easily as facts can be ignored, her truth was about to be tested by something far more sinister than a crying baby or a cold flight attendant: the full machinery of media manipulation. The segment that aired on the Patriot News Network (PNN) wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate construction designed to sow doubt, stoke resentment, and flip the script on who the real victim was. The host, Jameson Clark, was no stranger to controversy. His nightly monologues often skewered what he called woke hysteria and reverse racism. So when Marissa's story went viral, it was inevitable that her face would appear on his screen, framed not as a mother wronged, but as a symbol of entitlement culture. Clark's segment opened with dramatic music-edited clips from Marissa's video taken out of context and headlines filled with quotes that no legitimate outlet had actually published. So here we are. Again, Clark sneered, staring into the camera. Another viral meltdown, another so-called victim of oppression, and another airline employee thrown under the bus to please the mob. The eyewitness he introduced was a man whose face was partially hidden and voice altered. "She was loud," the man said. "She demanded special treatment. She yelled at the flight crew. The baby was crying nonstop and the other passengers were miserable." There was no mention of Claire Jenkins, the real witness. No mention of the second flight attendant who had tried to warm the bottle. No mention of the video that contradicted everything this mystery man claimed. But that didn't matter. To Clark's audience, million-strong, fiercely loyal facts were secondary. The narrative was everything. And overnight, the tide began to shift. Online comments on Marissa's post began to change. "Maybe you should have stayed home if your kid can't handle flying." "Why do people always play the race card when they don't get what they want?" "I saw the segment, your story doesn't add up." The pushback was coordinated. Bot accounts and troll farms began spamming her inbox with hateful messages. Her email and phone number were leaked. Photos of Isaiah, stolen from old social media posts, were turned into mocking memes. One particularly cruel image captioned a photo of her son crying with the phrase "future dropout," disrupting flights at 8 months old. Marissa was devastated. Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a bunker. She avoided windows, unplugged her doorbell, and stopped answering unknown phone calls. At night, she sat on the edge of her bed, rocking Isaiah to sleep, while reading each vile message that flooded her inbox, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to understand just how far they were willing to go. David was livid. "This isn't pushback," he said. "This is a smear campaign." And he was right. Using his background as a paralegal, David began tracing patterns of IP addresses, shared wording, across thousands of posts, links back to certain forums where Clark's followers coordinated digital harassment campaigns. He documented everything, building a case brick by brick. Then came the break. Claire Jenkins reached out again, this time with a screen recording. "You remember that man they claimed was a witness?" she asked. "I know him." The man, Kevin Parks, had been a local stage actor in Baton Rouge years earlier. Claire remembered seeing him in community theater. But what caught her attention wasn't just the face. It was a group photo she'd found online from a 2018 play. In it, standing just 2 feet away from Kevin, was a younger, less polished version of Karen Miller. It wasn't coincidence. It was conspiracy. The man PNN had brought on air to lie about Marissa wasn't just a paid actor. He was a personal acquaintance of the very flight attendant at the center of the controversy. David took the information straight to their attorney, David Chen, a civil rights lawyer, with a reputation for burning holes in corporate defense strategies. "We have collusion," Chen said flatly. "This is just defamation. This is intentional manipulation of the public record, and it opens the door to a whole new level of liability." They subpoenaed communications between Karen, Kevin, and PNN. At first, the network resisted, but under court order, emails and texts were turned over, and what they revealed was damning. There it was in black and white. A message from Karen to Kevin: "Time to make this woman look crazy. You know what to say. They'll believe us we're the right color." A second message from Jameson Clark to his producer read, "Doesn't matter if the guy's real or not. Long as he sounds convincing, the base will eat it up." Ratings gold. Marissa sat in silence when she read the transcripts. She had known deep down that what happened to her wasn't just bad luck, but seeing it spelled out, calculated, planned, monetized, hit her like a punch to the gut. "They didn't just doubt me," she said quietly. "They decided to destroy me." David Chen didn't hesitate. He filed an expanded lawsuit naming Karen, Kevin, Clark, and PNN as co-conspirators in a defamation and civil harassment case. The charges included defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud. PNN's legal team tried to invoke the First Amendment. It was opinion, they claimed, protected speech. But the court disagreed. "This is not commentary," the judge ruled. "This is character assassination." As depositions began, more truth came out. Karen had a long history of complaints lodged against her by passengers, almost all of them Black, Latino, or single mothers. Some had never been followed up. Others had been quietly dismissed, and Kevin cracked under pressure. He admitted in court that Karen had recruited him after her suspension, promising that the media would turn things around if they could discredit Marissa. She was furious, he testified. She said she'd lost everything. She wanted to burn her down in public, and she nearly had. But now the fire she lit was turning on her. The cable network scrambled to settle. They offered Marissa a large payout under a non-disclosure agreement. She refused. "I don't want hush money," she said. "I want accountability." Instead, Chen pursued a public trial. In court, the full video from Claire was played. The jury watched as Karen's icy demeanor contrasted with Marissa's steady calm. They listened to the texts. They heard Kevin's confession, and then Chen played the final piece, a secret recording from the second flight attendant. In it, she described how Karen had used the phrase "ghetto rat" in the galley, referring to Marissa and Isaiah. The courtroom fell silent. When the verdict was read, the outcome was decisive. Marissa was awarded millions in damages, compensatory and punitive. Karen was fired permanently, her name added to a federal no-hire aviation blacklist. Kevin was fined and banned from representing himself as a witness in any media case again. Jameson Clark was suspended indefinitely from his network and soon after resigned in disgrace. But perhaps the most powerful result was not the courtroom victory, it was the cultural reckoning that followed. The FAA launched an internal review of complaint handling across major airlines. Several airlines began requiring implicit bias training for crew members. And online, thousands of women, especially women of color, felt seen. Marissa, once afraid to leave her house, was now being invited to speak at universities' legal forums and parent advocacy groups. But she kept her focus clear. "I never wanted attention," she said in an interview with the Washington Post. "I wanted to feed my baby. I wanted to be treated with dignity. And when that didn't happen, I spoke up. That's all." David smiled when he read the article. "You didn't just speak up," he told her. "You changed the narrative." Marissa Daniels didn't set out to be a symbol, but through quiet strength, a refusal to be intimidated, and an unwavering belief in the truth, she became exactly the reminder that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to stay silent. The final judgment didn't just end a legal battle, it sent a message. When the jury awarded Marissa Daniels a combined $12.8 million in damages, $2.3 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational harm, plus $10.5 million in punitive damages, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle, about drawing a line in the sand between free speech and willful defamation, between airing opinions and launching calculated attacks on an innocent woman and her infant son. But while the courtroom victory was sweet, the true justice came in the slow public unraveling of those who tried to destroy her. Karen Miller, once a lead flight attendant at SkyWest Airlines, was now permanently blacklisted from every major airline in North America. Her license was revoked. The union that once shielded her distanced itself. Her severance package was stripped. After the trial, she tried to rebuild her life in private, but her name now forever tied to hate and deceit followed her. Employers Googled her and turned away. Neighbors avoided her. Old friends stopped returning calls. She moved to a small town in northern Texas, took up short-term retail jobs under a different name, but her digital footprint was permanent. The phrase, "time to make this woman look crazy," or "the right color," had become her legacy. Kevin Parks, the actor turned fake witness, didn't fare much better. Though he avoided jail time due to a plea deal and cooperation, his professional life collapsed. No casting agency would touch him. He became a symbol of fraud in online creator communities. The Screen Actors Guild issued a statement condemning his involvement, and several theater companies announced lifetime bans. At one point, he tried to launch a YouTube channel to clear his name, but the comment sections quickly became a minefield of scorn. Ultimately, he disappeared from the public eye, a ghost of his former ambitions. As for Jameson Clark, the firebrand cable host who fanned the flames into an infernous downfall, was the most dramatic. After resigning in disgrace from Patriot News Network, internal documents revealed years of similar manipulation in other cases. His advertisers pulled out one by one. By the end of the year, his primetime slot was gone. The network tried to rebrand, but its credibility never recovered. Lawsuits piled in from others he had slandered, and Jameson retreated from television altogether. He issued a carefully worded apology on his podcast in an attempt to salvage what little was left of his reputation, but no one bought it. He was finished. Meanwhile, Marissa Daniels stood tall. She never gloated, never mocked those who tried to ruin her. Instead, she moved forward with quiet dignity, just as she always had. With a portion of the settlement, she founded the Isaiah Project, named after her son. The foundation offers legal aid and emotional support to women, especially mothers of color, who experience discrimination in public spaces. The project launched community outreach programs, sponsored scholarships, and held national workshops on bystander advocacy and corporate accountability. Marissa didn't want fame. She wanted to make sure no woman had to feel as alone and powerless as she did at 30,000 feet. In interviews, she remained composed but clear. "This isn't about revenge," she said during an appearance on 60 Minutes. "This is about truth, about showing that the loudest voices aren't always the most honest, and that dignity is not something you earn, it's something you are owed as a human being." David Daniels, her brother, continued to work behind the scenes as legal advisor to the foundation. He eventually left his corporate law firm to serve full-time as the Isaiah Project's director of legal operations. "What happened to my sister happens every day in small, quiet ways," he said. "We were lucky enough to catch it on camera. But how many others go unseen?" Marissa's story was adapted into university case studies on racial bias, media ethics, and aviation policy. Several airlines invited her to speak at leadership training sessions, and one major carrier adopted what they called the Isaiah Protocol, a formal checklist to ensure the fair and compassionate treatment of parents traveling with young children, particularly those traveling alone. Even years later, passengers would stop her in airports, sometimes tearfully, to thank her. Many were mothers, some were flight crew, others were simply people who had seen themselves in her story. But for Marissa, the most important audience was her son. Isaiah grew up knowing the story not as a trauma, but as a triumph. He would learn when he was older how his cries sparked a movement, how his mother stood firm in the face of injustice, and how the truth, though battered and bruised, had carved a path through the noise. In the quiet of their home, far from the cameras, Marissa sometimes watched old videos of Isaiah as a baby laughing, playing, sleeping. She'd never show him the cruel memes or the hateful comments. He wouldn't need to see them. He would already understand what it meant to live with courage. Karen Miller's name faded from headlines. Kevin's videos disappeared from search results. Clark's voice became a footnote in the archives of reckless media. But Marissa, her name was etched into a different kind of history, a reminder that real strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like holding your baby close, speaking the truth with calm resolve, and standing your ground when the world tells you to sit down. Her journey wasn't easy, but it mattered. And for the thousands who came after her mothers, fathers, children, workers, witnesses, it made all the difference. In a world that often favors noise over truth, Marissa Daniels' story reminds us of the quiet power of dignity. It teaches us that justice isn't always found in grand gesture, but in standing firm when it's hardest to do so. For older generations who've lived through decades of social change, this story is both painfully familiar and deeply inspiring. It's a reminder that the battles we thought we'd already fought against prejudice, against manipulation, against being silenced, are still being fought today, sometimes in new forms. But it also shows that courage doesn't age. Whether you're 28 or 78, the ability to speak truth, defend family, and hold wrongdoers accountable never fades. Marissa didn't yell, she didn't fight fire with fire. She led with grace, evidence, and purpose. And in doing so, she changed the narrative. For each of us, the lesson is clear: when you witness injustice, speak up. When you're mistreated, document it. When the world doubts you, hold on to the truth. Because in the end, truth has a longer reach than hate, and dignity, once defended, echoes for generations. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't let Marissa's courage go unnoticed. In a world where dignity is too often dismissed and truth is buried under noise, her strength deserves to be celebrated. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in her shoes? Have you ever experienced or witnessed something similar? Your voice matters. Your support matters. And if you believe that no mother should ever have to fight this hard just to be heard, stand with Marissa. Share her story. Keep the conversation alive. And if you like this video, drop a 1 in the comments to let us know you're with us. It may seem small, but every one is a reminder that justice still has a place in this world.